So the tenants we work with in the pilot scheme, as I've mentioned previously, they came from so many different places. And I actually did one of the funny things I did when I was starting the pilot scheme was when I'd accessed all this property from the landlord I worked with, I thought, oh gosh, now I need a whole load of tenants, and where am I going to get them from? So I had this bright idea that find people who were poverty stricken or claiming benefits, I'd have to kind of go into their areas and make it known that there was a new service available. So we went out and we did some leaflet drops in Greater Manchester and Central Manchester, and I got in trouble for doing some of them and leaving leaflets in places like the job centre, but it really did work, and word travelled very, very quickly, and I soon started to receive inquiries day and night, round the clock. I made the mistake of putting my personal phone number on these leaflets, so it was a crazy time. And as I say, we had so many applicants who were wanting to come and move into property, and it really highlighted to me the need of residents in Manchester for affordable housing. As I say, I was getting phone calls round the clock, and I certainly couldn't have housed all of the people that I would have wanted to have housed. I didn't have access to anywhere near enough property as I did the amount of inquiries that were coming through. So, and this was quite a few years ago, and I still get inquiries to this day from this very same pilot scheme introduction into the marketplace. We still receive calls from the list that were on at Manchester Council, and we still receive calls from people that have passed my number on. I've never changed my number, so I'm still getting those calls through today. And as I say, that really does show to me that the need is still really there. And so if you're entering into this marketplace as an investor, you know that there is a huge bank of tenants for you to choose from, and that's something we discuss at a later stage in the course when we look at our tenanting, sourcing and screening and selecting. So now we're talking about the pilot scheme of sourcing, screening, selecting processes and procedures, and it was really kind of fathom it as we go through it. As I say, we were forced into this kind of manic period and trying to work through this huge demand for property and get as many people housed as we could. So I didn't sleep much for those few years, but the pilot scheme was amazing because it enabled me to really understand housing and homelessness in Manchester, and to get probably a view that I don't think many people would have been able to get before, because I was able to go into each side of the sectors. So I was able to see how things were operating within the local councils. At the same time, I was seeing how things were operating within the private rented sector and lettings and management. At the same time, I was also delving into the charitable sector and the third sector, and sometimes working with housing associations. So it was really broad overview of this industry and sector. And I'm condensing it down here for this course and giving you the key elements of what we've learned, and hoping that you can take away some of these some of this learning and use it as a transferable lesson and implement maybe new techniques within your business, or it might help you to enhance what you're doing in some way. Might help you to save a little bit of time each day if you change a little bit, I don't know, one of your systems. Something that we learned in the pilot scheme may just be something that's giving you problems at the moment, and we may come up with a solution. So I'm going to go through and talk about how we did things. So when we were looking at working in the pilot scheme, for me, I was working for the landlord and the investor. So primarily, I had to make sure that his needs were being catered for. He was the one that had employed me. I wasn't employed by anybody else, and I wasn't being paid by any of the applicants or the tenants. So I had to ensure that I was looking after the best interests of my client and my customer, and that was the property owner and managing agent. So what we did was we looked at strategies and systems which would maximize the profit and the cost effectiveness within the business. We looked at mitigating and minimizing the risk. So we wanted to reduce the risk as much as we could, and then we also wanted to try and share it if we could, and not just have it all on the investor's head. And then thirdly, and most importantly for me, we wanted to make a difference to the lives of people housed. And so we came up with a numerous different systems and procedures, and as I say, I copied a lot of things from my old career within the public sector, and we applied some of these strategies to the people that applied to come and work, to come and live within the properties. Some people we gave some support to, some people we treated just as normal buy-to-let tenants, and we assessed all of these people to see how well they did, and did they need support, and how well did they respond to support, and did they voluntarily engage with support. And we had some tenants, as I say, that were supported, and some tenants that weren't, and this was in for a totally rough ride for me for the next few years. And what I'm going to do is tell you about some of the applicants and participants that came into our scheme. And you can see from the slides on the screen there that I was working with all kinds of different tenants, really, from those who are rough sleeping and homeless, straight from cardboard boxes. We literally went and leafleted to them on Market Street in Manchester. We had people that came from bed and breakfasts and refuge type accommodation. We had people who were just sofa surfing, so people maybe that had a relationship breakdown, or they'd fell out with their parents. We had a lot of young people that came and applied who'd had rows with parents, and relationship breakdowns with partners was a common theme. We also had, unfortunately, a lot of domestic violence victims that were applicants of the scheme. And so what we decided to do, and this was actually my investor's idea, I said, why don't we kind of band people into similar types of environments? So we had a couple of different properties, and for example, one of our properties was, in fact, I'm going to go through them now, and what I'm going to do is go through my each house individually, because what we decided to do was kind of theme and bracket each home and try and put people living together in an environment where they would be around similar kinds of people. So we didn't want to mix the sexes, so we kept males and females separately, and we were very strict on that. We then set up some houses which we decided to put different kinds of tenants into different properties. So let's run through, and I'm going to look at my slides here. And the first property we did was actually one of my favourite models, and that was a domestic violence and females in crisis property. This was a property which worked really, really well, and it's a model which I still recommend to be used now. It was it kind of created a really homely environment to put these women together, and they set about to rebuild lives together, and they created quite a community and family feel within the homes. We worked quite closely with domestic violence charities in order to facilitate moves from refuges, and to make sure that the ladies that came into the properties were ready to move into properties. And I know we had a couple of ladies that weren't ready to move into properties, and we had a few issues with those. So it's a model which works really, really well, but you need to make sure you have a really, really good relationship with the charitable services that will be supporting you and that will be supplying you with occupants for your properties. It's also good to have a really good relationship with the refuges and the domestic violence charities, so that if you're housing in a multi-let environment, you can work to make sure that your tenants are blended well. So say if you might work with one particular refuge, and this goes across not just with ladies who are experiencing domestic violence, it goes across to all kinds of tenants that we work with. If you work within a refuge, you might have two ladies that don't get on particularly well together and are known to clash. And if you don't communicate with those, with the staff at that refuge, you won't probably know about that, and you may move two people in together from who are known to each other, and they might not get on well together living within a multi-let environment. So that goes across not just domestic violence and ladies who are in crisis. Now, moving on to young homeless females, that was a model we looked at, and not for very long, unfortunately, because there were lots and lots of social issues that came with the ladies, and there were lots of challenging behaviours that were displayed. there was lots of promise with the ladies that we worked with, and I would have loved to have worked with some of the ladies a bit more closely. However, I was not supported enough as a professional with organisations, and for me, the young females needed a lot more support than was available to them at that point. So it's not a strategy I would recommend, again, unless you have a very good relationship with a supporting agency who are able to give you some aftercare and support for your residents. It really is the kindest thing to you all to make sure that you're not setting someone up to fail, as I did with a couple of people within this young homeless female property in the pilot scheme. So that's one which should be aired with caution. Now, refugees are one of my favourite groups of people to house, and when I worked within the local authority, I spent some time managing the property on behalf of UKBA, which housed asylum seekers and refugees. And this was one of my favourite roles that I ever had working for local government. And I really, really enjoyed working with people from all over the world and lots of different nationalities and lots of different culture. And I found that refugees were generally very grateful for all of the support and services that we were offering them. And so for me, it's a strategy that I love to work on. Now, when I came into the private rented sector, this all changed because I didn't realise just how reliant I'd been on Language Line, which is, I don't even know how much it costs a minute to call Language Line, but there was certainly on a contract with it within the local authority, and I certainly wasn't when I set off as self-employed. So if you have a language barrier of tenants within your property, it's going to be really, really difficult. So there's my air with caution. If you can find refugees who have good command of English, I would happily let to that tenant group and be more than open to working with those types of tenants who may need a little bit more support in settling in. If you have tenants apply who don't speak English, as I say, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to communicate. And sometimes you're going to have to communicate legal issues and health and safety requirements, and unless you're really confident that you can work through that with the language barrier, or you have, again, a supporting agency which is going to work with you to act as a bit of a mediator, then I would err with caution. The next type of tenant we worked with was hostel and temporary accommodation users. So I received a lot of inquiries and a lot of interest from people who were staying in bed and breakfast type accommodation. And we did have a lot of these types of tenants come into properties, and a lot of those tenants did really well, and they ended up moving on into jobs or into relationships, and some of them just stayed in their circumstances. Again, try and make sure that you're getting some kind of aftercare or support, and that will be looking at the tenanting, sourcing, screening parts of things. You want to make sure that you're going to be getting tenants that are going to meet the requirements of your project. So every social property investment project is different, and make sure that when you're selecting tenants that you're screening them and you're comfortable with them, and they know what they're getting into as well, and what your requirements are as a property owner. So as I say, people who are moving in from temporary accommodation generally will need a little bit more support because they are moving from a homeless or some kind of chaos has happened in their life to get them into that particular state. So you would need to connect with a supporting agency if possible, and make sure that, as I say, you're getting adequate screening and you're not being you're not having anything that's not being disclosed to you about an individual. Make sure that you're getting a thorough screening of individuals, and it's not just that the temporary accommodation unit has run out of funding for this person and they just need to get rid of them, otherwise they're going on the streets, so they'll tell you anything to get so that you take them. Make sure that you're developing good relationships with these types of organisations so that you have a full disclosure of information. And then, as I say, it's fairest to all parties, because we have to always bear in mind we're trying to set people up to succeed, not to fail. So they have to be moved into the right type of environments. So males 35 plus was a great category to work with, and this was probably one of my favorite categories to work with. Most of these tenants really proactive, and they met their responsibilities. They were quite happy to, if I asked them to go along and complete tasks to do with benefits, or to go and see their landlord with paperwork, generally I'd find that those tasks were they were taken seriously, and they were they were always undertaken. I generally maintained good level of engagement with these types of tenants, and I've got some of these tenants that were employed directly by their landlords. So as I think I've said earlier, men who have split with wives and are perhaps just having a difficult period, and they've moved into property, and then the landlord struck up a good relationship with them, and they ended up doing some maintenance work or gardening work for them, which has been really, really good. So rough sleepers are the next category which I want to talk about, and these are one of my favourite groups to work with, and there's lots of funding and voluntary support that's centred around working with rough sleepers and the homeless presently. So you can find organisations that you can connect with and create really, really good relationships with, and we talk later on in the course about how to create value for both parties and how to set those relationships up. But you can engage with some amazing people, and I've worked with rough sleepers across the world now, with going to America too. And I find everywhere I go, there are just some amazing, beautiful, creative, talented, just perfectly just beautiful souls out there. And rough sleepers, as I say, they never failed to amaze me with their resilience and their determination. And I found that working with those who have hit rock bottom can be really fulfilling, because you can really help them to build back up and to rebuild their lives and become happy again and become settled again. And I always say when I work with rough sleepers, the only way is up, because they've already been to the rock bottom. That so I like to help build somebody up and set them up for success. So with rough sleepers, I find that you can do that, but again, with caution, and make good relationships with supporting agencies who will help you into selecting the right type of occupants. Now, challenging behaviours was something that I encountered a lot of during the pilot scheme, and unless you are really, really keen on working in this strategy for some particular reason, I would avoid it unless, as a deliberate choice of strategy, unless you have a really amazing supporting agency and you are really confident that they're going to give you all the support you need with a person with challenging behaviours. Now, remember, if you're working in a multi-let environment, you're going to find that challenging behaviours are going to implicate on the house and on the rest of the household. So it's really, really, really imperative that you source and screen properly. And again, follow our guidance when you're looking at sourcing and screening your tenants. And if you are working with people with challenging behaviours, make sure that you are getting every bit of support that's needed, and you're delving in all over the place and asking the professionals to give your tenant the help that they need, and they're not just being left on their own in a property for their condition to become worse or decline. So uncategorized shares. So this was a fun one to work with, and this was when we didn't put a specific blending together. So we just said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of more able tenants, so a couple of tenants that have been with us a bit longer and they've been through the process, and they're maybe working on work programs or at college now, and we're going to put a rough sleeper into this property and see if the other 3 or 4 tenants in the property can inspire a rough sleeper to change his life and improve things. So I saw this was actually probably my favourite model to work with, a mixed model, and you have to be really careful how you blend people. It doesn't always work, but when you can put together perhaps some lead tenants, some who have been through the process already and are doing really well, and you put somebody in who perhaps needs a little bit of jeering on and a little bit of motivation and encouragement, that can work quite well. you don't want to do it the other way round, because then it can work the other way. So the tenant that's doing really well, if they're with 3 people who have just moved from the streets, they may be brought back down. So it's good to do it that way. Also, something which I've seen quite positive responses with is mixing of ages, and we've had some really, really lovely relationships develop where we've put in older tenants with younger tenants, rather than putting all of the young tenants together or all of the older tenants together. We put in a little bit of a mix, and what I found is we have a lot of, I see a lot of people who are really damaged with, they're recovering from relationship and family breakdowns, and they don't have a sense of community and a sense of belonging and a sense of love and a sense of family. And when we've mixed ages together, we've seen, I know I have a tenant who lost a child, and she's an older woman, and she lost a child, and she created a really, really lovely relationship with one of our younger females who had had a breakdown with her family, and she'd fallen out with her family. And when we put these 2 ladies together, they naturally, organically grew this lovely, supportive, loving relationship, and they're both doing really, really well now. So I really like to mix. And again, if you're really interested in blending tenants and sourcing, screening, selecting of tenants, then watch the Totally Tenanted guide, and I will share with you exactly how we work through our tenanting process. Now, there was only one bracket that I've not talked about, and that was males under 25. Males with challenging behaviours was one of our properties, and that was a nightmare. That was probably the worst thing I ever did in my life. So as a quick top tip, don't take on a property of multi-let ex-rough sleeping males under 25 and put them all together with no support. You will not sleep for probably the next 2 years. So that is not a strategy I would recommend without working, again, with an amazing agency who are going to give you all the support. And even then, I would probably say that it would be better to place younger males with older males and try and allow that mentor-mentee relationship to develop. So that's all for this part of the training. And next, I'm going to move on to our evaluation. And when we work through all of these property projects, what actually happened and what did we learn from it, and what are we now taking forward into social property investment?